Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Welcome to another edition of APAICS in Conversation. Today, I am joined by Virginia Kase Solomón, CEO of the League of Women Voters, LWV. They are a nonpartisan grassroots nonprofit dedicated to empowering everyone to fully participate in our democracy. With active leagues in all 50 states and more than 750 leagues across the country, they engage in advocacy, education, litigation, and organizing to protect every American's freedom to vote. A bit about our guest today. Virginia has spent the past 27 years of her career fighting for social justice and civil rights. As CEO of the League of Women Voters, Virginia builds upon her vision of an inclusive democracy where every person in America has the ability and opportunity to participate and advocate for issues that matter to them. Please welcome Virginia.
Thanks, Madeline. How are you today? So happy to join all of you. Yeah, just really excited to jump into this conversation. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's just get right to it. Can you tell us a little bit about what the League is doing to ensure voters have information about the need to get out and vote in this upcoming election?
Sure. Well, one of the great things is we're a 102-year-old organization. And with that, that means we have lots of experience around elections. We were born out of the women's suffrage movement. And so our whole goal for the past 102 years is not only to help women vote, but to help all people be able to access the ballot box in a way that feels safe and fair and free and uphold free and fair elections. And so some of the things that we're doing right now, first, I think, is and most important in many ways is vote411.org, which is our voter education website. It is a one-stop shop for voting. You can go find out if you're registered to vote, where to register to vote if you're not, check your voter registration status, and then you can find out everything you need to know about all of the candidates, not just, at the top at the federal level, even down to those very local races. Who is your local judge that you may be electing, or your city council or county council? So municipal, state, and federal elections, we cover them all. And so that's one of the things that I think is most important. There are a few other things we're doing in order to protect the ballot. We know that there are times when there are people who engage in unscrupulous activities. And so in order to make sure that the ballot is protected, we also engage in litigation. So wherever we're watchdogs, wherever we see that something nefarious might be happening, or we think that people's access to the ballot may be restricted, we will file litigation because we're in every state throughout the country. We have more than 750 leagues. So one thing you can be sure of is that there are people who are going to be paying attention to what's happening so that everybody can have access to the ballot. And then last, it's about getting out the vote. We also know that in addition to voter registration, which is kind of the League bread and butter, it's about being able to make sure that people know what they need to do in order to be able to get to the poll and making sure that they have the supports they need. So we do a tremendous amount of get out the vote work as well. And that can be everything from texting, calling, door knocking, going to neighborhood meetings, having candidate forums where we help people be able to figure out, what the candidates, ask questions of the candidates directly. And so all of those things fall under that umbrella. And that's an area where we really, really like to focus.
Truly amazing work. Thank you so much for all that you're doing to ensure that communities and underrepresented communities feel that they are welcomed at the polling place, whether it's at a station or in their house if they vote by mail, all the things that people have in terms of the options. When it comes to voter registration, really that's one of the things that we encourage within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community is to register and to vote. What do you see as the common barriers to voter registration, especially for historically underrepresented communities?
Well, one of the things I would say is that oftentimes people don't even know that they're eligible to vote. And it's, almost mind blowing at times. And there are a lot of people who are newly naturalized citizens who aren't even offered the opportunity. So that's one thing I just want to say is just making sure that people are aware that they are eligible to vote. But beyond that, we know not every Asian person in this country is a newly naturalized citizen. We know that there are tons of people who have been here for a really long time. And so some of the things we want to do is, again, just having people check their voter registration status. I can't tell you how many times people have gone and not even realized that they were registered somewhere else, and maybe needed to change their voter registration status. So for us, making sure that people can access the ballot box, make sure that they can register to vote, knowing how to register to vote. Every jurisdiction is different. So if you live in Texas, for example, in order to register somebody to vote, you have to be deputized. So there's a certain process that you have to follow. And so again, going back to that website, Vote 411, when I say it's a one-stop shop, it really is, in that it'll tell you exactly how you can vote and how you register to vote. In other states, like in Maryland, where they have automatic voter registration, you can go to the motor vehicle when you're getting your driver's license, or even just getting an ID card, and you're asked if you'd like to register to vote. And so because it's so different in every state, making sure that people know how and having the information in order to be able to access the ballot is really important. And that starts with knowing how to register to vote, which people think it should be simple, right? It should be. And had we had the legislation that we were fighting for last year in the For the People Act, it would have been, but unfortunately, it's not. And so therefore, we have to make sure that people know state by state, and even county by county in some cases, how they need to register to vote. And so they can find that information on Vote 411.
Since 2020, there has been an influx of legislation by states to change voter registration laws. What can voters and voting rights advocates do to protect and expand the vote, especially in historically underrepresented communities? Because we've seen that it's become a little bit more restrictive. So what can voters and voting rights advocates do to protect what they currently have, if it's a little bit more expansive, and if it's not, how they can go up against these new restrictions?
So there's a lot. Like, first of all, I want to say there's no place where it's quote unquote bad to be a voter, right? Sometimes it's just more difficult. And so I don't want people to ever feel discouraged from being able to access the ballot. But I love the idea of asking how people can engage, because although there's that process of actually casting your ballot, regardless of how you do it in your state, whether it's by mail, early voting, or on election day, the first thing that I would say is people need to make sure that they have a voting plan. And that means doing all the research beforehand so that you don't have any issues when it comes to election, casting your ballot. But that's also with your family and friends. Like, have voting circles. Pick 10 individuals that you say, okay, if we're going to vote, I'm going to make sure that I have 10 other people that I'm bringing with me, because they need a voting plan as well. But if you want to up your game a little bit, so to speak, when it comes to that, there are some really interesting things, proactive legislation that's happening. So the combating and fighting against bad legislation is important, and we want people to show up and show out for those things. But it's also contacting your elected officials. I can't tell you how many times I've asked people, have you contacted your elected officials? And they've never even bothered, right? And it's not because they don't want to, they just never even thought of it, or nobody asked them. Call your congressman's office, call your senator's office, call your state representative or whomever it is. And there's some great pieces of legislation right now, for example, and I'm sorry I have to look down at my paper because there's so much, but right now there's an Arizona law that eliminates the 2-year waiting period for individuals with multiple felony convictions to be able to apply to have their rights restored. There's another Arizona law that requires cities and towns with populations greater than 20,000 to provide an accessible mail voting option for the blind and visually impaired voters. There's a Connecticut law that expands absentee voting and election day hours. So things like that. And then there's another one that I think is really, really important right now, and that is, it's HR 8770. It's expanding the voluntary opportunities for translation in elections, the VOTE Act, which is another one that will make sure that language access is available for every person person at the polls. Something that simple as calling and reaching out to your elected officials, or sending letters, sending emails, all of those things actually help you make sure that they are listening and accountable to us, the voters.
It's amazing to see how there are so many different pieces of legislation throughout the country, and based around state, that doesn't have one defining sort of here's the thread of what us as voters should have each and every time when we go up to a ballot box. So if you've moved from a different state to another state, having to re-register your voting, having to do all the things that you need to do to be sure that you're eligible, bringing the right identification, if you even need identification, all of that is part of the process of being a voter. And so I'm so glad that you have this information on your website to be able to educate people. We also know that there's voter suppression out there. So it's unfortunate, and it's something that, I think all of our communities try to combat to make sure that there's fair and equal voting. What does that look like, and how do you define that? And how do you know if it's actually happening in a community?
Yeah, so I mean, the voter suppression piece is tricky, right? It's sometimes subtle. We often highlight those most egregious cases where you see people standing in lines for 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours. I mean, we've seen literally times where people were waiting 6 to 8 hours to cast a ballot. That's a very blatant picture, and you see those on the news. But there are other ones that are much more nefarious and subtle and don't get the same amount of attention. Changing polling locations last minute. One of the things, the Voting Rights Act was gutted back in over almost a decade ago. And so what ended up happening at that time, there was a section called pre-clearance. For those who are watching who don't know, and pre-clearance, what it basically did was required, before any state or any laws were changed, or they were making big changes to the voting process, they would have to get permission from the Department of Justice. That is no longer there. And so people can make changes like changing polling locations in a very short time frame. Purging of voter rolls, you would be surprised. The voter rolls, we want them to be up to date, right? So people who have passed away, their names are no longer on there. We've seen things where voters are just completely purged. I will tell you, back in 2019, our executive director in Ohio found out that she had actually been purged. She's the executive director of a voting rights group. And she's like, I'm here. So things like that are also, but they're even the subtle things, asking for people for ID when they aren't required to have it. My mom, who is a brown woman, and she speaks with a Spanish accent, when she took me to vote for the first time, they looked at me, they saw my pale skin, they made an assumption about who I was. Never even asked me, even though I was a first-time voter. But yet my mom, who is a brown woman who speaks with an accent, they gave her a really hard time, asked her for proof of residency. She had to go home and get a utility bill. That's actually one of the reasons why I do this work, because I saw how my mom was treated differently. And I think so many of us can relate to that. Maybe we have the ability, or maybe the know-how to feel comfortable fighting back. But so many of our parents, our elders, who may not feel as comfortable, may feel intimidated when something like that happens. All of those things are voter suppression. Anytime that somebody feels that they can't do something, they can't access the ballot, or it's made harder to them, that's voter suppression. And so what we can do about it, there's an election protection hotline that we can call. It's 1-800-our-vote, I believe. I want to double check on that, the number, but there's an election protection hotline. Calling your local League of Women Voters. Again, we're watchdogs. We're going to be paying attention to what's going on. Speaking to whoever you can around the with the elected officials at the polling location and creating a stink. Sometimes you just have to bring it up and make sure that you're calling it out in the moment and making sure that those groups, I know Asian Americans Advancing Justice is another organization that's doing a tremendous amount of work. So groups like ours are really some of the go-to, because we're going to raise all kinds of holy heck if we can to make sure that people have access.
Well, that's good news to hear. I always, think it's important for us to, protect the vote, make sure that every vote that is, there is able to be counted. So let's go on the flip side. To your knowledge, what are, where are places in this country where states are doing a good job of expanding access to voters? What can you talk a little bit more about how those implementations are helping to provide access?
Yeah, so what I spoke to a little bit earlier, for example, in states like Arizona, where you're seeing really great strides in increasing access to the ballot. The other place I would say is Michigan, believe it or not, where it has also been ground zero, but you have an entire group of individuals who have been fighting for a ballot initiative, and that's actually going to go on the ballot in November, and it would change voting policies to drop boxes, expand early voting, absentee voting. And so don't underestimate the power of ballot initiatives. Citizen-led ballot initiatives are huge in a lot of places in this country. And we've seen almost 50 bills with expansive provisions moving in 16 states and in the DC City Council. And so overall, we've seen 44 states and DC consider 596 expansive bills. So when you think about what's going on in those states, how great they are, New York has expanded definition of illness for voting absentee. We know that in a lot of states, you can't vote absentee or vote by mail unless you have an excuse. And so New York is expanding what that means. Oregon, there's a law that expands online voter registration to individuals without a DMV record. That's really important because not everybody has the same form of ID. And so all of these are places where I would say, there's a lot of opportunity. And then you have states where there is a lot of potential for opportunity. And so what I say is, if you're in a state where you hear that there are a lot of challenges, I would recommend connecting in with a group that is on the ground, somebody that you trust, an organization that you trust, reaching your local elected officials and saying, hey, we want these things in our state as well. I think there's a ton of opportunity. Oftentimes people just aren't really paying attention until it's close to an election, but this work really is all year round. And I think there's opportunity for every state if the demand exists.
In recent months, I have seen an uptick in women who have gone to register to vote. So what do you suggest that they do right now to get ready for the upcoming elections, for the general election? What do you think they should be doing to prepare for that?
Well, and I think I said this earlier around having a voting plan. Every woman needs to have a voting plan. Every person should, but women in particular. And really the issues that impact women most. Women are often the primary caregivers in their home. And so there are issues on the ballot around and elected officials who are deciding women's rights as a whole. Wherever you fall on choice, I think we can all agree that healthcare for women is an important issue. Women's healthcare should be put first. And we often have found that that's not an issue that legislators are paying attention to. So women really being able to be aware of what the issues are that are going to impact them in their daily lives, looking at what's most critical to them and then making a voting plan around that and doing the research on the candidates, asking the right candidates questions. We find oftentimes that people make decisions based on a 60-second ad that they see on television. They like that person. Do I think that they're probably honest or trustworthy? Or people make party line votes. This is not the time to be making a party line vote. This is really a moment for us to make votes and make decisions regarding our personal lives and how these things will impact us. And so doing that candidate research and having a voting plan is really, really important.
Well, there is so much work to do ahead of us in the November elections. We are excited that you were able to join us today and to hear about the ways that the League is ensuring that all of our communities have access to the ballot. Thank you for joining us, Virginia, and thank you to all those who are watching today. Please visit vote411.org for more information. Virginia, I'm going to give you this opportunity to provide any last-minute comments or remarks.
Oh, thank you so much. I just want to say this is so exciting for me to have the opportunity. A large portion of our membership, I want to say probably 30% of our membership, come from the Asian Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian community. And so for us, this is an important relationship. We don't see the Asian community as different. We are all one, but we have differences among us. But the power that Asian women have brought to our organization and to the movement for voting rights has been incredibly powerful. And we want to invite people to join us. You don't have to be a woman. We're open to all. But really, how do we harness our collective power to be able to do things that will be impactful for our communities and to create lasting and sustainable change? And I'm just so excited that we're here with you all today and all the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you for having me and really for having this discussion.
Thanks so much, Virginia. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. We look forward to seeing you the next time.